1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Hi everyone, I'm Gemini Brett of More Than Astrology. It's a treat to be back at EA Zoom meetings wearing Uranus of blue and the mad scientist hair because I've been asking to channel this Dr. Strange planet for the last few days, and that means I haven't been sleeping. Just gonna check the chart one more time. Happy to see a Gemini moon. And now let's do this screen share thing and get into it. So this is Uranian Revelations. I'm Gemini Brett. You can find me at morethan.astrology.com. This just happened. This was the launching of TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite, going to look for extraterrestrial worlds, and launched just yesterday during Uranus Cazimi. How absolutely Uranian. And what about this? The Southwest flight that blew an engine in the air just before the Cazimi. How absolutely Uranian. This strange planet, this marvel of the skies, this electric blue wonder, Dr. Strange. So Uranus Cazimi was yesterday, as I'm recording now on April 19th, 28 degrees, 29 minutes, tropical Aries, sun aligned between Earth and Uranus, channeling that strange wonder through the light. This happens every 369.66 days. Uranus in the heart of it, though on the other side, in the throne room, and a new cycle begins. A cycle of karma, perhaps? Dr. Strange Boy George here, who had this hit Karma Chameleon in 1984. Projected Orwellian year, and 84 is a very interesting karmic number. According to some camps, this is when we are free of the karmic implications of our incarnation. And many have associated that strange mystery with Uranus, because Uranus has an 84-year orbit. But this rap about 1984 was around well before Uranus was discovered in 1781. Some associate it with Jupiter. Jupiter, the guru. Why? Because Jupiter has 12-year cycles, right? Well, kind of. I'm going to show a couple of things about these beings in my own nativity. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts on Friday, Venus's Day, October 24th, 1975, 7:39 p.m. Now you know everything about me. And now just a little bit. I'm kind of a Uranian fellow, Aquarius up there at the midheaven, and Sun applying to conjoin Uranus and Scorpio at the time of my birth, with Uranus's north node on the rise. Mercury connects that node to my midheaven. And Mercury's got a thing for outer planets at the time of my birth. But, you know, very interestingly, to look at these Uranus cycles, this is me when I turn 84. It's going to be a little bit. And you'll notice that Jupiter is not in the house. This is a Uranus return. This is the first Uranus return, Uranus with an 84-year orbit. And many will say Jupiter because he's 12 years. Well, 12 times 7 is 84. But that's not when Jupiter returns. Jupiter cycle is actually 11.86 years. And I am just realizing that I forgot to hit the special button before I shared my screen. So I'm going to start that again just in case this helps cameras not be in the way. All right. Splendid. Okay, so Jupiter's synodic return is actually 83 years. Jupiter's cycle is 11.86 years, and 11.86 times 7 is not 84, it's 83 years. So it's nice for us to get a little exact. This will be my Jupiter synodic return that happens for us at 83 years old. And it's just before the beginning of the Uranus cycle, the return of the Uranus cycle that I was born into back in 1974. And this is what I want to rap about a little bit today, is this idea of synodic cycles. Synod means meeting, and it comes from sunodos, which is sun and hodos, together, and the way. Not sun like the sun in the sky, which is Helios, but I think that's really interesting because so much of the synodic cycles can be seen through the way of the sun. There's an image yesterday of the Uranus cazimi, Earth, Sun, Uranus. So from Earth's point of view, this is the meeting, synod, of Sun and Uranus, which happens every, not 84 years. That's Uranus's sidereal, or of the stars, orbit. But every 369.66 days. The slower the planet, the faster the sun-planet synodic cycle from Earth's point of view. So what about these synods? What are they? I love to start personally with moon when I engage with the difference between sidereal and synodic. This was new moon a couple of days ago, April 15th. And it takes about 27.3 days for the moon to return to the same degree of the zodiac, or align from our point of view on Earth to a star that's sidereal of the stars. But another couple days are required for the moon to catch up again for its meeting with the sun, right? So new moon to new moon, or full moon to full moon, or first quarter to first quarter. This is the synodic cycle. New moon would be the best way to describe this, because this is, from Earth's point of view, the moon meeting the sun, right? 29.53 days on average. Check that out on a chart. Here's the Aries new moon from a couple days back. Very close to Uranus. And we'll let them run. And, you know, I kind of see sun and moon as spirit and soul. Like almost like a parent-child relationship. Sun sends moon out to explore and reflect back to the light from these other realms. You know, how does Cancer reflect Aries, and Aries reflect Taurus? So 27.3 days after new moon, moon will return to the same degree of the zodiac where the cycle began. That's the sidereal, right? And then another 2.2 days to catch up a little more. I look at the phases of the moon to teach me the aspects. You can see the aspects in the phase of the moon. She's the only one that will do this for us with our bare eyes. You know, if the moon is trine sun, you will see a gibbous moon. So it's a really wonderful thing to do, to play with the shape of the moon and to embody in a sentient experience these aspects. When I see the four principal phases that we speak of, the new moon, the first quarter moon, or the opening square, the waxing half moon, right? The full moon, and the closing square of the cycle, the waning half moon, the third quarter square. As seed, sprout, flower, full moon's flower. If it's willing to be pollinated, it will become fruit that carries the seeds for the next cycle, and on we go, right? So moon heading out to reflect Taurus from Gemini. Now we're looking at the sun. Sorry, I had a Uranus moment. Let me go back to that. So this is Uranus cazimi, right? We can look at these synodic cycles in a way through this experience that we have with the lunation. You know, this is something that we can experience every 29.53 days on average, new moon to new moon. We can play with these phases. It's a very fast connection to the archetypes, to the movement of the heavens, these beautiful reflections. For outer planet synods, the sun moves faster, right? From Earth's point of view. Of course, that's because it's Earth's movement that defines the movement of sun in our skies. So for a sun-Uranus cycle, if we want to compare it to the moon-sun cycle, it's in a way like the sun is acting like the moon and Uranus is acting like the sun. Certainly, I'm not suggesting this is what they are energetically, but just to say that it's the sun that will wax away from Uranus, right? So Uranus entering Taurus soon. How will Cancer light reflect that Taurus Uranus essence? We'll get to the quadrature, the opening square, and it's the sun that applies to the square because it's the sun that moves faster, right? So we had the seed of the cycle in Aries, late Aries, 28.5 degrees Aries, and the sprout will be in the sign of Leo. The sun will continue. And you'll see that Uranus goes retrograde right there. Outer planets go retrograde when the sun is just about to the waxing trine or the opening trine of the cycle. Opposition, right? The middle of the planet's retrograde period. And this is when it is closest to Earth, or Earth is closest to it, right? This is the reason why an outer planet stations retrograde, as we know. It's just like passing a car on the highway. Yeah. We have this optical illusion of it moving backwards, though really we're both moving forward just at different speeds. And don't try this when you're driving, but the further the car that you're passing is from you, like a few lanes over, the longer this apparent retrograde motion. So Pluto retrogrades much longer than Uranus does, which retrogrades much longer than Mars does, for example. And the retrograde of a planet will always be, the middle of the retrograde period will always be when Earth is closest to that planet. So why do we say this causes issues? I mean, some of this might be a remnant of geocentric cosmology, when cats just could not figure out why planets would stop in their tracks and start backing it up through the zodiac for some time. And those brainy folks like myself really freak out often when we can't figure a thing. So all these different models were created to reason with the nature of retrogrades, and none of them worked, right? Until we sorted out the heliocentric nature of our solar system. And then it's easy for the outer planets, like passing a car. Though this was figured out before the car came around, right? It's a different story for inner planets, but we're not going there today. Anyway, I kind of like to think of the potential interference of retrograde times in this way. It's like the sun is the source of this ripple that we're surfing on as Earth. And like when Venus or Mercury retrograde, that's when they are passing us by. And they get in front of our ripple, and there's an interference thing that happens. For one thing, they're just so close to us now, our energies are combining in ways that might seem a little strange. And the thing about ripples is that even if there's a body on the other side of your surf, there's also an interference pattern. So I even look at these orbits, you know, like these ripples coming out from sun. And at this time, it's like Sun and Uranus on opposite sides of the Earth cause this interference pattern. We'll see that Venus is retrograde at this time as well. So Sun, Venus, Earth, Uranus in October. I spoke with EA Zoom meetings last year about thinking of our 12 signs, not only as quadratures as we do through the equinox and solstices, but also in 3 seasons, fully elemental if we look at the natural zodiac, which we know begins with Aries, right? So in that sense, moving from fire to earth to air to water as the first season of life. This has been called the personal in the second season in this regard, the interpersonal in the third, the transpersonal, right? And studying these outer planet retrogrades has really helped me understand why that works. And that it's reflected in these synodic journeys, because as the sun, if you keep Uranus at the ascendant here, as the sun is waxing away from Uranus, right around the square, the opening square, Uranus will slow to begin the retrograde. All the outer planets, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, beyond, right? They'll slow at the square, and then when Sun applies to the trine, they will station retrograde. Now, it's not exactly 120 degrees. Uranus gets it pretty early at about 108 degrees. So you see in this image, which I'm calling the heretic's journey, these arrows on the outside, the teal arrow from what we might think of as halfway through the ninth house up there at the top, is the direct motion. And then when Sun gets to just about to the trine, and you see that down there at threshold, this will be when the retrograde period begins. And hence the threshold, and then through the initiation, the cave, the ordeal at the opposition, the middle of the retrograde when Earth and Uranus are so close, which offers the reward, and then the return as the planet stations direct when Sun now is applying in the waning trine, the closing trine of the outer planet cycle. This language you might be familiar with. It doesn't come from the heretic's journey, but rather the hero's journey, right? So if the Hero with 1,000 Faces was a book that Joseph Campbell wrote about the monomyth, something that he furthered from Carl Jung's work, and the idea that there's so many different stories throughout ancient time and modern alike that fit this mold that Joseph Campbell had 17 principal stages for. Others have used 9, and here's Star Wars and 11. Christopher Vogler's in The Writer's Journey has broken it down to 12, which of course fits our astrological map better, right? Here's an image from Clever Prototypes, where we see this kind of clockwise motion. Part 1, the call to adventure. So this would fit the primary motion, the day. But if we want to map it for the secondary motion, the orbit through the signs, I'm going to tweak it around a little bit. And I do it even a little more so because I'm interested in the ordinary world having nothing to do with Uranus, right? And so what you see here is kind of mapping this idea of the hero's journey to the Uranus cycle. Now, in the hero's journey, they talk about coming from the regular world and crossing the threshold into the special world. And then after the initiation, the ordeal, coming back with the elixir to the special world. And why? This, for me, especially in the case of Uranus, is to bring the new world. And if I want to do it in quadratures, I mean, the other hemispheres, like the beginning of the cycle would be the revelation, the kind of awakening, so that we can bring the revolution. These are Uranus words, right? But ordinary world has nothing to do with Uranus. So I'm still working on this. This was my main intent, was to kind of talk about this and where we each fit in the cycle. We might look at some charts at the end. We'll see how that feels. But as I've been studying with Uranus this week, I've found some really interesting things and called to share that at least first. So here we are, the opposition, solar opposition to Uranus. In other words, exactly halfway through the Uranus retrograde as Earth is passing Uranus by, aligning between us and Uranus. And this is October 23rd, 2018. And the Sun will continue, right? And you'll see here the Sun stop for some reason. Why? Right, because look at Uranus at this time. 0 degrees, 0 minutes Taurus, retrograde. In other words, Uranus, who is ingressing Taurus, having spent years now in the sign of Aries, on May 15th, will retrograde in August and then return to Aries, regress Aries, for some unfinished business on November 6th. And there's some really interesting happenings just before Uranus crosses from Taurus to Aries. The square with the lunar nodes is perfected. Yeah, Uranus will cross over. Here's Moon in Scorpio, just to help us make sure we're tuning into this thing, completing the fixed grand square. And then Uranus crosses over, and the nodes cross over, and there's Venus waiting for them in Libra for a cardinal square. there's that chart. So, I mean, really interesting squares coming in, especially, you know, speaking to EA Zoom meetings, and I know a lot of you are students of Jeffrey Wolf Green's work, where he speaks about, you know, skip steps on the evolutionary path when we see planets at the lunar bendings. Those are the traditional names for the square points to the lunar nodes, right? Hey, Linda, somebody's microphone is on. If that could get muted, I would very much appreciate it. So we have these interesting squares going down with Uranus's regress Aries. What does it mean? Really charged charts. Sun, of course, will continue from there, and you'll see that the trine will bring Uranus's station direct. And then here we are with the fruit of the cycle. Yeah, so a seed in Aries, Taurus, Uranus, or Taurinus, as I like to say, for both the sprout, the square, and the flower, the opposition. But Uranus will station retrograde and return to Aries. Look where he is, 28.5 degrees Aries, right where the cycle began. And of course, a lunation can't do this, right? Moon and sun do not station retrograde. So it's very interesting when we play with these outer planet cycles, and watch their dance and watch where their retrogrades are. Sometimes they return to the sign from which they came before the ingress. As Chiron, who we know recently stationed Aries, he will also regress Pisces for some unfinished business. They seem like very important times. And these times too seem so important, these windows of after the moon returns to the place of the new moon, or in this case, the sun returns to the place of the seed, the meeting, that period between this and the next conjunction. You know, it's balsamic for a moon, even more so. What would call this for a sun and Uranus? And notice that Uranus hasn't moved too far, right? I mean, he moved forward, retrograde, came back, and now is moving forward again. But sun is just 4 degrees away when it catches up to the place of the meeting, right? So the Uranus cycle is about a year. That's sun's obviously return to the same degree of the zodiac, plus 4 days. So that's that 369.66 business. All right, so we will in 2019 have the Uranus cazimi in the sign of Taurus. So of course, we're all going to be speaking about this Taurinus ingress, right? Coming very soon to a theater called You, May 15th, 2018. But know that the cycle that Uranus is in, with the sun anyway, is an Aries cycle that was seeded a couple days ago. I find this to be super important. And so we get our first Taurus cazimi, or Taurus Uranus cycle, synodic cycle with the sun in 2019. The last one of those was 1941. So for most of us, this will be the first Taurus sun and Uranus synod of our lifetimes. And thinking about 1941 is going to bring us into some interesting business. All right, so my dear friend in love, Anna Zaharia, has helped me bring a lot of these things that I'm contemplating into sight with her gifts in the illustrative worlds. I want to say thank you to her. That's our little logo you see down in the corner. If I want to bring this more into the reference of an outer planet, I've got to shift it around a little bit, because the idea is that the moon is born in the evening sky, right? I mean, we see the first crescent, Diana's bow, after new moon time in the sunset west. And it's a different story. So if I'm looking at that seed, sprout, flower, fruit, kind of moving from new moon to first quarter moon, which we see culminating at sunset, to the full moon, which rises at sunset, to the third quarter moon, which does not rise until midnight, right? It's different from these outer planets. So apologies to Anna, but I gotta kind of flip the script if I want to look at this as seed, sprout, flower, fruit, as far as the sun's aspects with Mars or Jupiter or Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, Eris. This is another image that Anna created for Astrology Hub. And I really just love this map. You see that spiral, right? I'm so fascinated with this time when the moon returns to the seed point of the zodiac, that time between then and the next new moon. And I really haven't found a name for it. I mean, it's when the moon is semi-sextile, the waning semi-sextile with sun, closing semi-sextile, I guess. But it needs a name as far as I'm concerned. I'm still trying to sit and figure out what that one wants to be in my own personal cosmology. All right, so we can see this with the moon from that returning to the seed, finding the way to the next new moon time. And, you know, the principal thing I hope to encourage with this talk, if it's not something you've done so far, is to dig into your synodic cycles, right? What month were you born into? So I'll use my chart as an example. I'm a Scorpio sun and Gemini moon. But I was born into a Libra month. What do I mean by that? I mean that the new moon before my birth, the cycle I was born into, was in the sign of Libra. Yeah, we can do this for all of the planets. I have Mercury as a morning star in Libra, and he aligned between Earth and Sun. This is when I personally, and many do, begin the the Mercury synodic cycle, which is about 116 to 118 days. The Cazimi, the interior Cazimi, Mercury between Earth and Sun. And that was also in Libra shortly before my birth. Mars in Cancer on my chart, and met the Sun well before I was conceived in the sign of Libra. So I see that as the conception of my Mars. And there's wonderful ways to play with that. But see, what we're doing when we look at these cycles is to get out of the frame of the film, that's us, and look into the scene a little bit more. My Venus is in Virgo. I mean, there's all this Libra stuff, and like wonder what her cycle is. And she was seated in Virgo. We first saw her heliacal rise about a week later in the sign of Leo in 1975 when I was born. But I can look at Venus and Mars. You know, where was their meeting, their last meeting before my birth from Earth's point of view? Also in Libra, right? So we can do this with any planet. Like, what Jupiter-Saturn cycle were you born into? This was very close to my Uranus synod. The Sun met Uranus October 21st, 1974, over a year before my birth. But I see that as when this cycle was conceived, that I'm born at the very end of, because as you can see in my nativity in the inner wheel here, the Sun is just applying to conjoin Uranus. It's going to have to face a Saturn square before it gets there. Right? So this is that 1974, October 21st, Uranus Cazimi. This is the cycle I was born into, and there's a lot of Libra action happening there. Chiron across the way, as you can see, and across the way today, and yesterday specifically, this Aries Uranus synod. So I'm halfway basically between the time of my Uranus synod seeding and the eventual return, which is when you're 84 years old. And yet, right now, I'm not 84 years old, and this is 43 and a half years after that October 1974 Uranus synod that I was born into. So what gives, right? Why not half of 84? Why not 42? Here's my 42nd solar return, and Uranus has not yet opposed my Uranus. We often tell people that when you're 42, you get your Uranus opposition, right? For my generation, it's a Pluto square Pluto around 37, the Neptune square Neptune around 40, and the Uranus opposition around 42, then the Saturn opposition. We know these cycles, right? Well, it's not always around 42, just know that. And this is why, right? No planet orbits in a circle. Venus is really close. When you look at a planet's eccentricity, the closer it is to 0, the more circular its path. Uranus's eccentricity, 0.046. And Uranus is closest to the sun. This is called perihelion, closest to sun, in the sign of Virgo. And furthest away, the aphelion, in the sign of Pisces. So when close, fast. And when far away, slow. Yeah. Uranus is not the planet with the greatest eccentricity. That's like Mars. But Uranus, because he's so far away and the eccentricity is much higher than Neptune's, has the greatest distance between its closest to the sun point, which is about 18.5 Earth distances away. Those are called AUs. To its furthest point, the aphelions, almost 20 Earth distances away. This is an image of Uranus ingressing through the tropical signs between 1843 and 2087. Felt like it took me about that long to put it together the other days. I'm looking with Uranus ingressing the sign, regressing, retrograding back into the previous sign, ingressing again, and then just calculating the time. And you can see at the bottom of the averages, here's a little bit closer, that spends the shortest amount of time in the sign of Virgo. Why? Because closest to the sun and therefore fastest, and the longest amount of time the aphelion in the sign of Pisces. So bring that also into which of the cycles you were born into, and you'll see that it matters when you're looking at when does your Uranus opposition come around. You'll see this is a generational thing too, something to play with. So I'll first have at 43, on my 43rd solar return, Uranus will be in Taurus for the first time, but I won't have my first exact opposition of 3 until I'm 43.5 years old. So back to 84, this is the Uranus return, right? And that one's pretty close. In fact, the cycle is 84 years in a day. This 84-year idea of karmic release. And I'm not saying that's a thing, but I've been fascinated when I first heard that. And then when somebody told me that's Uranus, it's like, why would that be Uranus if it's been around and talked about for so long? I can't get it, right? Well, here, this image of Shiva, it said that Shiva sat and didn't really become a god, but became the first yogi, the sadhu yogi and the sadhu guru, the first teacher, because he sat for 84 years. And then he taught 7 sages. And this to me is a very important clue about what the 84 is. Found this Jan Brett flashcard online today with the porcupine who tells us that 12 times 7 is 84. We saw that with the Jupiter cycle, but remember, Jupiter is 11.86, so 11.86 times 7 is 83. That's your Jupiter synodic return. Well, this is 12 signs and 7 planets, right? So there are these amazing cycles of 12. Traditionally, we call them perfections. And 7 days of the week and metals and all of these amazing things named after the visible wanderers, right? That to me is the magic of 84. But Uranus this week has shown me that he holds keys to the mysteries of time that are further blowing my mind. Our minds were collectively blown in 1781 when Caroline and William Herschel spotted a comet. And that wasn't a comet at all, right? This thing was tracked for a few days after reported, and holy smokes, there's another planet out there. I mean, imagine the shock. We have discovery, I have discovery in quotes here, because this was certainly not the first time Uranus was seen. It's not the first time Uranus was recorded. It had always just been written down as a star. Uranus, most folks don't know this, is visible with the naked eye. Not always, especially when Earth is closest. When is that? At the opposition to the sun, right? So sun opposite Uranus. That's a good time to go to dark skies and get initiated. I was initiated a couple of years ago and saw Uranus in space with my face. And it really helped me reframe the way that I think of what Uranus is and what he does for us. Uranus was discovered March 13th, 1781, 10:30 p.m. Bath, UK. This is William Herschel's telescope event with his sister Caroline, who doesn't get enough credit for this thing, right? They were kind of a team. And Uranus in Gemini is close to the heliocentric north node. Not super close here, right? 13 degrees. The geocentric node's closer, right? So here is the discovery date. Uranus in the sacred hoop of stars, as the Lakota call this place, where the galactic anticenter lives, where the Milky Way on the opposite side of galactic center meets the ecliptic, our solar system's plane. on the hand of the high man, as the Celts called this magical place on Orion's club. So you can see Uranus there. This is where Uranus was when discovered. I'll bring the orbit in. One freaky thing about Uranus's orbit is that it's one of the closest to the ecliptic plane. This is like, I think it's especially freaky because it's not freaky, and Uranus seems to be in every other way. But you can see the node here. The node is where the path of Uranus crosses the path of the sun from Earth's point of view, right? This is the north node, which is the ascending node for the northern hemisphere, or the descending node for the southern hemisphere. And there is a difference. Should they be different energetically? I thought so for a long time until I thought about this and contemplated the apex of the sun's way. What is that? Our sun is moving quickly through space, which means our solar system is, which means Earth is, right? And we are moving towards the direction north. So when a planet is crossing its north node from latitudes south of the ecliptic to latitudes north of the ecliptic, and Uranus does this in Gemini, it is literally moving towards the future. And at the south node, it's literally moving towards where we came from, because the entire system is moving towards the direction that we call north on Earth. This is the geocentric nodes and perihelions and aphelions at that time. I shouldn't have even said that, because the perihelions and aphelions will change pretty quickly from a geocentric point of view. And the nodes do too, but not so much for planets that are far away like Uranus. But this is a geocentric node that's important to know. There's a lot of debate. Should we use heliocentric planetary nodes or geocentric? I say both. But understand that if we want to do this from a sacred astronomy point of view, a witness and experiential, a sentient point of view, we're talking about the geo node, right? I mean, that's when we see planets crossing the path of the sun's orbit. This, by the way, this is a wonderful website to write down in that lower right corner. If you don't have astronomy software, astrology software that lets you determine planetary nodes, you can get all sorts of information at TrueNode. It's an amazing place. Go check them out. All right, 1780. This is the Uranus Cazimi before discovery by William and Caroline Herschel. Okay, you'll see that Sun and Uranus met at the 25th degree of Gemini. And Mercury here was right at the geocentric node. To show that the Uranus discovery, this very strong T-square. Mars and Saturn in Sagittarius. The sign of Uranus is south node, Uranus in Gemini, and the sun at Uranus's aphelion within 2 degrees in Pisces at the time of this discovery. This is that same view, but with Uranus at the ascendant, which is how I'm looking at this idea of the heretic's journey. It's like, where is the sun compared to Uranus? If I put Uranus over there on the conjunction side where the sun Uranus met before this, you know, at the beginning of the cycle. There's something I didn't mention about the arrows on the outside of this image before. Their thickness represents the speed. So the fastest speed of the synod is when Sun and Uranus meet. From Earth's point of view, that is the fastest that Uranus moves. And the fastest speed of the retrograde, right? The station where blue turns orange here, kind of in the bottom middle of the 5th house. That is parked, right? 0. And the fastest retrograde motion is at the solar opposition. So I'm interested in where Mercury was at this time too, because he's in this place that I'm calling the resurrection. William Herschel not only discovered or maybe rediscovered Uranus, but also found infrared light using a prism. And I think these are amazing things. I mean, this is the Industrial Revolution, electricity had just been found, American Revolution, French Revolution are going down. There's a lot happening, and we know that these recently discovered planets, Uranus and out, they carry the zeitgeist of the time in which they were found. And the more we find out about them, the more we will understand their energy through the astrological correspondences. We confirm a lot too. We've always known Uranus was freaky, a lot of reasons because of these revolutions. But the more we discover about Uranus, the freakier we prove that planet to be. So very importantly, you know, in both of these examples, Herschel is utilizing technology to expand the human experience beyond the limitations of our senses. And of course, I'm suggesting this is what Uranus is about. And I love the image of the rainbow here. Maybe many of you have heard that Barbara Hand Clow speaks of Chiron as the rainbow bridge. I will say that really this was Uranus's role at first. Uranus is sometimes visible. This is the Uranus glyph. We don't usually draw it that way, but it was literally built to be an H for Herschel. Looks better like that, right? Because now we see the circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter, which our traditional glyphs are composed of. And many think of Uranus as an octave of Mercury. We hear this all the time, right? And there's a good reason. But the old glyph for Uranus, this is the first glyph we used for Uranus. We have a mix of the sun, right? The circumpunct and Mars. Shows us a little something about Uranus, which is very Martian. And I think most of we astrologers have found this to be true. This is an image that I almost always show folks that I sit with who are in a Uranus cycle, and share also this kind of kitschy mantra that came in for me in my Uranus-Pluto times, which is choose change before change chooses you. And I will always ask the client to meditate upon this card for some time. Most of them have seen it before. This is the Tower card from the Rider-Waite deck, right? But to see it as if with new eyes, and to describe to me as if I'm somebody who cannot see the images on the card, right? Encouraging them to break it down to what color robes are these people wearing? What can you say about the people? Why is one wearing a clown? What crown? What happened to the other one? How many windows are there? What shape do those flames take? Yeah, why are there flickers of light in the shape of what are called yods, like leaving one of these beings who appears to be falling, but following the one who might be diving, testing that strange cape, because why not try to fly when the tower got struck from where? Above. You know, Uranus to me carries so much of this. I mean, just in the way that Uranus was discovered. Let's rap about that, right? I'm gonna just stop my screen share and just rap to you for a second, in fact. I mean, this is an absolute shock. Now, if the so-called Copernican revolution hadn't taken place, probably we would not have been in a consciousness to receive the light of Uranus, because as we know, the solar system has always ended at Saturn, the skin of the solar system, right? I mean, Jupiter says, don't you remember? You're an angel, go back. And Saturn says, finish the gig, you know? You came to play the Earth game. Do it well. Do what you came for, right? I see Saturn in Jupiter, by the way, not as enemies, but rather participating in the path, right? That I like the hot air balloon model, that Jupiter is the hot air that lifts you, but you go nowhere without the fabric, which is Saturn, which constricts you. And where expansion meets constriction, it feels like this war. But once you get the point of the thing, it's about the equilibrium of the two, yeah? Well, where are we going? Maybe Neptune? And how Uranus teaches us, build a balloon. You have technology. You are a creator being too. So the fact that Uranus is sometimes visible, and the fact that when Uranus came in, we said, wow, it doesn't stop at Saturn. You know how it used to be. It was Earth, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, stars, and God, right? There is something else out there. Uranus, this strange thing, this breakthrough, this revolution during these amazing times of revolution, of change, of shift, you know? The lightning bolt of awakening. It's Promethean energy. And that was 1781. And, you know, they tracked Uranus for some time. And they realized that he wasn't obeying the orbital rules that he should. And that meant something was out there even further, pulling on this Dr. Strange. And that, of course, was Neptune, who was discovered in 1846, also with a telescope, but they knew where to point it because Neptune was mathematically calculated and was within 1 degree when discovered of where it was predicted. So you see, Neptune teaches us that we all have pull on one another. We're all connected. There truly only is one thing. You know, we are the Pisces seas. But we would never be able to connect to that consciousness that is Neptune without the revelation of Uranus. So Uranus comes like the lightning bolt to strike that tower, right? The crown flies away. We fall seemingly to our death, but survive, and now can build our own righteous tower from these crumbled bricks if we so choose. But the whole point of the thing, the structure, Saturn, had to get blown up. Why? So the waters of spirit. So Neptune could come and speak to us, you know? So first, Uranus shows up like Mars, in that aggressive side of Mars. Mars is many things, yeah, but there is that side of Mars traditionally associated with the tower card, at least for those who associate the planets and the cards. Some say you should, some say you should not. But for me, it is so Uranus, and this is Uranus's gig. Come blow it up, shatter the structure, right? If it needs to be. Now, this might be kind of loud. I really appreciated when David Cochran told me, as one of the many Astrology Hub listeners last year, that Uranus is the planet of free jazz and improvising. I was like, well, what about trauma and the car wreck? You know, it's like, and it really helped me understand that, you know, playing free, the whole point of the thing is just to be in the moment and not be constricted by some rules. And this is what the trauma wants. This is what the car accident wants. They all want us to find the moment now and to live in that place. Yeah, and we're going to get a good teaching about this if we're willing to receive it when Taurinus comes to town. And if we're not, look out, you know? And that's how it is with Uranus. And this is why I say choose change before change chooses you. We know that we don't want to be status quo. And we know that things in our lives need change. And there are great change agents out there, Pluto, Uranus, from very different worlds who can come and really shake things up. But we can do the shaking, so there's no breaking. And that's a really important part of the scene for me. You know, these are the teachings that Uranus, as this rainbow, the one that we can see, who teaches us there are other beings out there that we cannot, who helps those waters, you know, of Neptune, of Pluto, flood into this place that's a little too structured. And that's Uranus like Mars, blow it up. And then he heads back, you know, and he heads back like Mercury to go talk to Neptune. It's like, these cats are crazy. They have like language and math and hands. And if you want to talk to these beings, Neptune, so nebulous, these are the types of ways that you're going to have to communicate to the earth folk, you know, maybe to first through Saturn, right? So when we find agreement from structure and the breaking apart, just like the expansion and the constriction, it doesn't have to be so aggro, right? All right, how do I get this thing happen again? Right. So the Tower card meditation for me is just profound, especially when Uranus comes around. And I think with Uranus, it's coming in ingress, and especially with this last Aries-Uranus cycle, most likely of your lifetime, because the next one won't be till 2077, I believe. All right. And that to me really matters. So I believe Rick Tarnas was the first, maybe in modern time, to suggest Prometheus would have been a name for Uranus because he's like that light bringer, you know, that revolutionary one. But William Herschel thought Uranus should be named George. Do you know that? Right? The Georgian star. Why? Because George was paying the bills. King George was paying the way and had William Herschel move in and become a royal astronomer and all this, right? So you can imagine that the American astronomers in the time of a revolution against the crown were not really too into that name, and so many weren't either, right? Neptune was put forth as a name for Uranus. You know, it took a while for Uranus's name to stick. It came from Johann Elert Bode, the very famous mathematician, astronomer, who's most known for supposedly what's called Bode's law. This is an amazing thing that, utilizing the orbits of the visible planets, predicted the orbits of the other planets, including the asteroid belt. Maybe we could say Ceres, the largest piece that I would suggest remains of what used to be a planet there, out to Pluto, except Neptune doesn't fit. That's how invisible Neptune is, right? And you know, Shiva has implications of the one that is not seen. And here a trident, like this god of the sea. That to me is very interesting. Well, Neptune, we know, isn't the right fit for Uranus, so that didn't stick for too long either. And he was named after god of the sky, right? Uranus. And Bode's philosophy was, well, Jupiter is Saturn's son, and Saturn is the son of Uranus. Well, kind of. First of all, we know the tale that Saturn castrated his father. And he did that for his mom, you know, not just for his own drive. So there's some trauma in the nature of Uranus. I mean, even if we want to say that Uranus is Prometheus, he had a pretty traumatic experience as well for his hubris. And Uranus has had some trauma too. This image would be much more appropriate like this. Why? Because unlike most of the planets that basically spin like tops in their orbit about the sun, Uranus is rolling like a ball. And the astronomically accepted current theory is that an Earth-sized planet smashed into Uranus way back in the day and knocked it on its side. This is true for Uranus's rings and for the moons. That's a trippy thing. So are the seasons because of this, right? I mean, summer solstice or winter solstice on Uranus, one side of the planet is in permanent light and the other side is in permanent darkness for not quite 21 years, but around that. Equinox time works a little bit more like Earth. And Uranus was discovered in one of those times. The solstices are very close to the aphelion and the perihelion, by the way. And the equinoxes are close to the nodes. So there's all of these moons, 27 moons in these 13 rings at Uranus that are all orbiting in this kind of perpendicular fashion to the orbit. It's a very strange thing. So are the fact that the moons of Uranus are named after Shakespeare characters, right? I mean, that's a significant slip from the gods. Not just Shakespeare, by the way, Alexander Pope, who I've been researching this week because of this, and reading a lot of his poems have been interesting. He's kind of speaking in Promethean ways about punishment for hubris in the ego of the so-called Enlightenment, the so-called Age of Reason. So the marvel of Dr. Strange, Uranus, this being, I mean, one of the things is that his name is Greek. Uranus, right, is a Greek god. The Roman counterpart is Salus. So we use a Latin kind of spelling for a Greek name, and all the other planets to that point were named after Roman gods, right? So that's a strange thing, and especially because you can say Uranus, and I didn't even know. I thought I was being careful when I said that. People say, "Oh, you're saying urine." You should say Uranus. So you definitely don't say Uranus, right? And that's obviously the great joke about Uranus. But there's a thing about that. The reason why Uranus and Neptune both are blue is the methane in their atmospheres. Very different atmospheres. The current rap is this is because of this trauma that Uranus experienced being collided by a planet, you know? Think of like the Uranian rap about car accidents, and it's very interesting, right? I really feel it's a beautiful thing for us to engage with some of these astronomical knowledge about these planets, because it helps us not only confirm what we say about the planets and through correspondence and astrology, but helps us connect to different things that they offer. Uranus is freezing. Uranus is colder than Neptune, except on the inside. I mean, both of them, the pressure of the methane, it's suggested that it rains diamonds on these planets, and that there are like iceberg-sized diamonds floating around in the atmosphere, or that could be a bunch of bullshit, right? But this is a theory that is a pretty fascinating study. We also know that Uranus's magnetic field is like shifted 90 degrees about from the rotational axis. And that's a super freaky thing. The theory was that was because of this collision that knocked Uranus on its side. But actually, Neptune's like that too. And nobody knows why. Great mystery. The only reason why we do know about this is because Voyager went out there to see Uranus. And the only reason that Voyager was able to was because of this stuff, uranium, more specifically plutonium. And this is kind of what I want to rap about mostly. So uranium discovered by Klaproth in, when was it, in 1789. I mean, very close after the discovery of Uranus, right? And this was after Bode suggested the name Uranus, and so this new element was named uranium. But you can read here at the bottom, it was kind of a mistake discovery. He didn't find the real stuff. We didn't know it was radioactive for decades, and I've been tuning into this history. I'm not going to excite you with it. I almost said bore, but I find it to be actually very exciting. I think it's a cool study. But in 1940, after the discovery of Pluto, right, 1930 was Pluto's discovery, plutonium was created. First, Neptunium, there's what's called the trans-uranium elements, right? So think about the trans-Uranian planets, and the trans-Uranian elements are called Neptunium, which is used then to create plutonium, which is in the bomb, unfortunately, but that's also how NASA energizes these deep space probes, because they get too far from the sun for solar. Yeah, I mean, even Apollo, there was some radioactive material in them, and NASA's running out of their plutonium. But the Department of Energy decided to start making it for them again, which might be concerning, because this seems to be the great awakening that Prometheus, that Uranus, and the Aries cycles brought to us, right? So here we go, the ingress, which I'm calling Taurinus, May 15th, 2018. But again, Uranus is going to back it on up and head back to Aries for some unfinished business in November. But I'm thinking that Taurinus, one thing about Uranus is energy and Taurus is earth, right? So these could actually be earth first energies, free energies, magnet motors, things that have been suppressed for so long. And I know there are other planetary signatures that seem like the iron wall for some of these things to happen, but this is one of the necessary responses to some of the things that we've experienced during the Uranus-Aries time. So NASA's actually shown that it's creating fission engines. It's a very different thing than fusion. And I don't know if you've heard of stars in a jar. You might want to look into them. All over the world right now, folks are creating these devices that are meant to get 7 times to 15 times hotter than the sun on the planet that you live upon. Don't you think we should get a vote when people start building things like this? It's kind of psychotic, and yet if they work, it will free us from any need of oil and gas or nuclear fission or whatever, right? I mean, this is a whole different scene. So maybe this is part of Uranus through Taurus. I would like to think so. One thing we know astrologically is this long period is coming to a close. The whole sign square between Uranus and Aries and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. Bless whoever created this image that I've used 1,000 times in presentations like this. I love this, right? Now we get the trine, right? I mean, Taurus, the same element as Capricorn, and now we're talking, instead of quadruplicity and squares, right, modalities, we are talking trine time, right, in this agreement in this elemental way. So a flower exchange, and yet this trine will not testify. So let's talk about a little old technique. Yeah, this I find to be really important, and the idea is that planets that are applying to an aspect do not testify if either planet leaves the sign before the aspect is perfected. It's a really powerful thing to lens in nativities. And again, it's something that takes us out of the frame of the film and requires that we allow the chart to breathe, look back in time and look ahead in time. So this is a really wonderful example of an ancient technique applied to modern times and modern planets. Uranus ingressed Aries on May 27th, 2010, and thereby applied to the whole sign square with Pluto. Now look at all these oppositions that were happening. It was a full moon near the Uranus nodes, Mars opposite Chiron with Neptune, Jupiter and Uranus opposed by Saturn, and Venus opposite Pluto. The pretty charged chart, a lot of red lines here. And again, the beginning of the Aries, Uranus, Capricorn, Pluto square by whole sign. This, of course, is the sprout, right? The first quarter, the opening quarter of the cycle that started with the seed in the mid-60s in the sign of Virgo, specifically the 16th and 17th degrees of Virgo, I believe. I might be off there. But here's the deal. This thing did not testify. Why? Because shortly after Uranus ingressed Aries, it hit the brakes, put it in park, and then shifted to reverse and backed it on out into Pisces. You can see Pluto here at about 4 Capricorn, and Uranus not even to the 2nd degree, stationing retrograde and leaving for Pisces, okay? So that breaks up testimony. If you haven't heard of this, you know, many of we modern astrologers don't look at the ancient techniques. They are powerful when brought back through the time machine to the future, to the present. Check out testimony. It's a powerful thing. So this one would testify. Here's Uranus's second ingress Aries, March 11th, 2011. Now applying, even though you can see it's further out of orb, to Pluto, and this was that day, right? The great earthquake of many. We had the Christchurch earthquakes in New Zealand and in Chile. The whole ring of fire was sparking off, and this one we know caused the tsunami. This is Fukushima reactor in Japan, and a nuclear meltdown. I mean, when Uranus moved from the waters of Pisces to the fires of Aries, a uranium radiation meltdown. It's scary how literal our craft is sometimes, isn't it? And this, though further out of orb, is a whole sign square that would testify, because without leaving the sign, Uranus perfected the square to Pluto for the first of 7 exact squares on June 24th, 2012, the last of them March 16th, 2015. And they've been separating ever since, right? I mean, the ancients gave a lot more credit to applying aspects, especially applying aspects that would testify maybe only, than they did to separating aspects, and yet it still holds, you know? I mean, I think most of us are familiar with Rich Charnas's great work, Cosmos and Psyche, and looking at these long periods and the quantum astrology approach that Rick Levine and many others speak about too. It's an amazing thing. It's very real. And so we know this nature of Uranus and Aries and Pluto and Capricorn still hold. But just look at this idea of the first moment of the Uranus-Pluto square being this Fukushima incident. If we honor applying aspects that would testify. This is the sprouting of the mid-60s seed in the sign of Virgo. And one of the happenings in the States was Earth Day at that time. You know, opposition to war. Sergeant Pepper's in the UK was such an amazing time, as we know. Civil Rights Act over here. But this, what is this telling us? And how are we going to respond? Right? So for a while, I mean, we were all just buying our seaweed and preparing for the fallout. And that seems not to have happened. But did we go to sleep on this thing? I mean, Japan's starting up all these reactors, not this one, that were shut down in the wake of this thing. I watched a animation the other day in Japan of promoting plutonium with Mr. Pluto, this cartoon who was showing you it's safe to drink water with plutonium in it. Radiation's not safe. What are we going to do? How are we going to respond to this? I believe that this was the, major moment of Uranus and Aries, and we're being called to respond. And I think that Uranus and Taurus might just help us do that if we choose to stay tuned in. So Uranus ingressing Taurus, May 15th, 2018. And now we apply to the whole sign trine between revolutionary Uranus and evolutionary Pluto. But this too will not testify, because Pluto will leave the sign and ingress Aquarius before the first perfect trine, which will happen instead Gemini, Aquarius, in the air signs, in the place where Uranus heads towards the future, Uranus's north node. This is the first of 5 trine charts. Here's the 5th. But, I wanted to point out, look at all of the blue lines on this Uranus ingress Taurus. Remember the Aries chart, all the red, all the squares? Pretty different thing. So I will say things are very much shifting, but we have to stay awake to it. And know that when Uranus returns to Aries, first we have this fixed square, moon moving quickly, but squaring the lunar nodes, and then a cardinal square just after. One that won't perfect because Venus is retrograde as well, but a very strong alignment by orb. What does this mean? What are we being called to as souls? What are we being called to as human beings? How can we help clean up this mess? The second Taurus ingress, Taurus to stay, Uranus to stay in Taurus for some time, March 6th, 2019. And it's the last one, shortly after the Uranus Cazimi, when the sun catches up on April 22nd, 2019. That is the first Taurus Uranus Cazimi since 1941, when this Manhattan Project was going down. They were building the bombs that were dropped, and designing these power plants. And yet now, cold fusion and very hot fusion, and perhaps these free energy devices. We know solar is coming online, wind energy is coming online, but they're not enough. There has to be something more. And it's time for us to put our minds to the earth, our ears to the ground, and ask Mother if there's a way that we can actually play with technology, right? Because I think since the Industrial Revolution, which was the time that Uranus was discovered, we're now aware that a lot of those breakthroughs have not been so positive for the planet, right? But does this mean that we should just turn off the lights? I mean, I'd love to see the Milky Way again. That'd be kind of cool. But I also like the fact that we can speak online like this, This does seem to be part of the dawning of the age of Aquarius. But ruining our world should not be a criterion. And I think just like the trauma that we know sometimes comes in with Uranus, this is to help us find the moment, right? To help us receive spirit. And not everyone will respond in that way. Some will choose to just, be in the space of that happened to me and take that to the grave. And that's okay, but a lot of us will alchemize and shift through the initiations of our traumas and shift that poison of that happened to me and he did that to me to the medicine of, oh, he did that for me. And maybe even through a more Neptunian lens, oh, I see, I did that for me through this mirror. That's another, because we are one, and this is helping me heal and feel and know and grow so I can give that back to the all. And this is one of my roles here as a soul, right? But what is our role here as humanity, if you want to call it that, or the time in which we reside? How can we truly choose to engage with this new age and open up towards it? You know, a lot of people pray for the decimation of the human race because we're such naughty beings and a virus, and that should not be the scene. Yeah, it shouldn't have to get to that. But for us to unfold free energy, we're gonna have to be a little more responsible. First of all, like as without, so within. So we must free our energy if we want these shifts to come around. You know, what has you hung up? And what did Fukushima teach us as without, so within? How am I abusing my power? How have I ignored the systems I have in place in my internal world, right, that are not running clean energy? I would love to co-manifest a world with you where our technology actually supports the earth. And that requires that we honor our roles as creators and not fall prey to hubris, not even know what it is we've done because we think of these machines as something that are here to help. We don't understand that we are the parents, you know? That's like the road to Terminator. So time to be stewards of the land and also stewards of and parents of these technological children that we create. We are creator beings. This is why Prometheus stole the fire, to give us that gift, why he made us in the image of the gods, to remind us that we are creators ourselves. If we do not claim that responsibility, things will run amok. So here we are in the last Aries-Uranus cycle for a long time, till 2777. In the first of this recent exploration, the first Uranus synod in Aries since the discovery, actually, that's not true, since the 1930s, 40s, and probably the first one for you, certainly for me, was this thing. Why? What's it telling us about? Linda, if my camera's in the way of this, would you hide it so people can see the full graphic? And if it's not, no worries. These might be things to take screenshots of, folks, because you can find out which Uranus synodic cycle, and by that I mean the Sun-Uranus synodic cycle you were born into here. So I'll go slowly. Basically, just look for the date before your birth date on the left. That's when the Sun met Uranus. Maybe you were born like December 28th, 1946, right? So you look back to June 8th, 1946, and you see 17.5 Gemini. You're close to the North Node. And you can see then on the right that you were also born after the solar opposition. All right, so hopefully people got it on this screen. Here are 1949 to the 1968 synods. I know a lot of you come from this time. And write down the degree and the date, all right? Hopefully you caught that. You could take a screenshot as well. 69 to 87. So a lot of you come from this time. Libra, Scorpio, Sag. All right, and then in very recent times, 88. Capricorn, we know that was that kind of Saturn, Uranus, and the end of Sag, and then the Uranus, Neptune, and the early degrees of Capricorn. Aquarius, Pisces. Slow going in these signs because the aphelion in the sign of Pisces. And then the first ingress Aries, 2011, right? So if you're 5 years old watching this, the slide applies for you. All right, 84 years. So now you'll look for your Uranus synodic return. So you can just work with that date and work with the degree of the zodiac, right? So this will be the time of some of your Uranus returns, you know, if you're turning 84 between now and 2032. for many more of you. I had a Libra synodic cycle I was born into, and mine comes around again in 2058. It's October 21st, 1974 was the one I was born into, and now October 22nd. And the one I was born into was the 29th degree of Libra, and here the 30th, the last degree of Libra. And this is what shocked me over the course of the last few days. So here is the April 18th, 2018, yesterday's Uranus Sun Cazimi, 28.5 degrees Aries. And looking back 84 years, 27.5 degrees. And one day earlier, the cycle is 84 years in a day, about. It depends on the sign, but about that. So now look, I can track that degree moving forward. 84 years from now in 2102, the last degree of Aries. What does that mean? The next time it comes around, 84 years and a day later on April 20th, 2186, the first degree of Taurus. So these synods themselves move through the zodiac very slowly. Do you get that? So this Aries Cazimi from yesterday, April 18th, 2018, will come around next, 84 years in a day, April 19th, 2102, last degree of Aries, and then the first degree of Taurus, April 20th, 2186. What does that mean about this? Because this was March 11th, 2011. Notice the Sun and Uranus here. Uranus in the, ingressing Aries. So at that birthplace, I mean, why do we associate 0 Aries, the first degree of Aries, with the beginning of the zodiac? Because it is where the sun is on the circle of spirit, where it always is, the ecliptic plane, but also, as it only is twice a year, at the circle of matter, the plane of the spin of Earth, the primary, the celestial equator, you see. So at these crossing points, which are like the nodes of the Earth-Sun experience, and this is the north node of Earth-Sun. In my world, that's my cosmology, Earth, matter, Sun, spirit. And this is where the sun now is crossing the plane, bringing matter and spirit together and heading towards the future. And the nature of the East, the Aries glyph. I do this, why? Because if you sit and look east, you will see that stars that rise south of east head to the south, and stars that rise north of east head to the north. The East is consistently doing this eternal fountain of youth. And it is literally is the Aries glyph. If you take the ground away, it's the Pisces glyph. So here is the sun, also at Uranus's aphelion point, the moon at Uranus's node as Uranus ingresses Aries, and you can see that the sun is not far away. This is the end of a cycle that was in the last degrees of Pisces. And here is the beginning of the cycle on equinox day, March 21st, 2011, half a degree Aries. So where did it come from? It came from the last degree of Pisces, and that was 84 years and a day earlier, March 20th, 1927. That synod had been moving through the sign of Pisces since February 21st, 91 BC. The 84 years and a day before that, it was in the last degree of Aquarius, February 21st, 175 BC. We can take this back further. My software would only allow me to go back to about 5000 BC, thankfully, or else I would have been at this for days and days. But check this out. I mean, in 4544 BC, this same synod that I'm going to call the Fukushima synod was in the last degree of Sagittarius. It ingressed Capricorn in 4460 BC on January 26, as you can see there. Then to Aquarius, about 2160 years later. they'll be different. It depends on where the retrogrades are. It also depends a bit on the planetary speed, Uranus's speed, which changes as we saw through the signs. But the average, just of these three that I mapped here, it's about 2,160 years. What does that mean to you? Have you studied your precessional theory? Right? 2,160 years is in a way the numerologically accepted period for an astrological age. We're moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. When? Well, if the thing started at BC, which I prefer to call BP, before Pisces, then it will be at 2160 AD. That's when Newton had it pinned. And it really depends. But another way I map this is just to look at the first degree of Capricorn, which was January 22nd, 4460 BC, and saw that that was about 6471 years before the Aries ingress, March 21st, 2011, that date of Fukushima. Well, 10 days after Fukushima. That's 26,000 years. In other words, these Sun-Uranus synods move slowly every 84 years and a day, moving about a degree of the zodiac, taking about 26,000 years to process, that's a forward movement, through the entire zodiac, right? And this is the periodicity of the great year, the Platonic year, as defined by the precession of the equinoxes, right? The precession, the backwards movement of the solstice and equinox points, or really any point of the tropical zodiac through the constellations, right? I mean, the wonderful thing about precession of the equinoxes is that we're connecting both to the tropical system, the directions, right, which the seasons also are a result of, and the sidereal system, the star system. All right. So like Rudyard's, one of his criterion for the dawning of the age of Aquarius was Regulus, well, let me say it the correct way, tropical Virgo precessing or moving backwards to the star Regulus, and that was in October of 2011. So there's a lot of argument about when this begins, but one thing that is for sure, we are living in a time where the solstice points are aligned to the galaxy, right? These very important points of the tropical zodiac, these directional points, and our time, 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, is at the galactic center. My favorite researcher in this way, who recently passed, John Major Jenkins. I recommend everyone read his book, Galactic Alignment. Every astronomer and astrologer should read that. But his window for is about 1975 to 2025. This seems to be, as John Major Jenkins has shown, what the Mayans were looking forward to. I found it in the Bible, the Old Testament, now the New. It's certainly in the Celtic tradition. John Major Jenkins is showing it in the Vedic traditions and the Mithric traditions, these prophecies around the solstice alignment to galactic center, all right? And during the age of precession, about 26,000 years, divide that by 4, you'll see that every 6,500 years, either the solstices or the equinoxes will align to our galaxy. Now we have in our time, 0 Capricorn, December solstice aligning to the galactic center, but June solstice is aligning to the other side, the hand of the high man. 6,500 years ago, when this Fukushima synod, I'm calling it today, I guess, and I'm not too comfortable with that, but that's okay, moved into the first degree of tropical Capricorn, galactic center was aligned to the September equinox point and the galactic anticenter to the March equinox point, the 0 Aries point of our tropical zodiac. Yeah. So these windows of galactic alignment to the solstice and equinoxes are also shown by this electric heretic, this Doctor Strange planet out there, Uranus. And so, you know, I have this resistance to this 84-year karmic thing being related to Uranus because it's been around a lot longer than him. And as I showed, you know, for me, it's like, it's more of like a profection thing and 12 times 7. And, you know, in the Hermetic tradition, we speak about the 7-year cycles. And many associate that with Saturn, But Saturn's not a 28-year orbit, right? Saturn's 29 and a half years. You slip from 7 pretty quickly. And it depends if you were born with Saturn close to Earth, which happens in Cancer, or furthest away, which happens in Capricorn. This is one of the reasons why Saturn is at home in Capricorn, because in Capricorn, Saturn's furthest from the sun. This happened 2 days ago, by the way, on April 17th, when he stationed retrograde Saturn at aphelion. Furthest from the sun, slowest, coldest. Saturn likes these things, right? In Cancer, closest to the sun, warmest, fastest. But 7-year cycles. A year for each of the wandering lights that we can see with our face, unless you've been initiated and seen the heretic Uranus too. 12 years, 12 signs. Another great cycle that we can connect to. And if you study the ancient techniques of profections, you will see this isn't just a Jupiter thing. All right. So we can stop here, Linda, or we could cruise on and do some chart examples. I'll ask you to unmute, and what do you think? It's probably a good time to wrap up, right?
Okay, well, we can wrap up, but was 21 people still here. Do you mean like look at one of their charts?
Well, I have charts of some famous people, which I rarely do.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, we could look at other people's charts too. I mean, you can look at your own. I'll just show you what I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm.
So I will... Chris Ford, so basically you're seeing Uranus here in the middle of this ring. You can see the whole sign aspects, right? With the conjunction on the left, and then semi-sextile, a debatable aspect, traditionally speaking, the sextile, the opening square, etc., right? And then mapped on the ring are these words that were kind of reframed from Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. I'll look at that in a second. I forgot. I'm going to plug a bunch of stuff real quick. I just came through the Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers class. We had like 100 students. It was great. And I'm recreating it. So instead of long 2-hour classes, there are going to be these 15-minute bits with the end as a test question that is a password also for the next video. And it's basically, the intent is to re-nature astrology, to reconnect the chart in the sky, to learn to see the chart in the sky, to sentiently, in a Taurus, right, Earth way, Uranus in Taurus, I think will be great for this type of study, embody our astrology, and by doing so, connect to the proofs of the astrological equations we use. So you can check it out. I write here morethan.astrology.com/sacredastro. I need to actually do some work over there. But you can find me at morethan.astrology.com. You can also find me in Boulder with the Cosmic Intelligence Agency in June 8th, 9th, and 10th with Adam Summer and Shannon Gill-Jones and Russell Olson and Yulia Simas and Alex Trenworth. We're going to do a marriage of heaven and earth happening there. I hope you can come out. We're going to have a lot of fun. I'll be in Tucson, Arizona with Organization for Professional Astrology. Their iAstrologer happening in October. It's like a beautiful hotel, a little bit out of town, dark skies. Every visible planet will be visible at that time, except Uranus. Well, actually, that is the opposition. It's right around them. Maybe we'll see Uranus. I'll be at iAstrologer, which is basically about helping us as astrologers retool and redefine the way that we present ourselves in our business, so we can bring real astrology to the real world to make a real difference, right? We are about this. So I hope you can come out. I will be leading a 3-day intensive Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers course. We'll be in the classroom a bunch with animations and things, but we'll be outside under the big screen, building sundials, doing some shadow play, watching the heavens with our face, and connecting the chart in the sky in this way. So come and join me and do this work in person. It's a fascinating thing. I'm really happy that OPA has made astronomy for astrologers part of their curriculum for certification. And I'm very honored. I mean, this is my dream, to bring nature astrology back. All right. So I'll be kind of teaching this thing during the second bit. It starts, when is it? October 8th, 9th, 10th is the part 2, which is the Sacred Astronomy for Astrology and their peer group and some other things. So check it out at OPA astrology.org. You can find their Career Astrologer magazine there as well. I hope you've checked it out. It's a free publication around the equinoxes and solstices. This year, I'm writing an Astronomy for Astrologers column. The first article just came out in the March equinox edition, where I talk about the astronomy of the tropical zodiac, helping us see this. And again, so many thanks to Anna Zaharia for helping me see the stuff that I see on a computer screen. And we're going to work hard to bring a lot of the astronomical things that have had the astrology bled out of them over time by people who are doing this half of our craft, which is, watching the sky and collecting our ephemerae and that kind of thing. It's time for we beings who are interested in this path of the soul also to do that side of our craft, which is before the correspondences, the other half of astrology, which is astronomy. Yeah. So you'll see this logo around some. This is Gemini Brit and Scorpiona. There's a lot of kind of exciting things coming through this. So you can find my business page on Facebook, which is facebook.com/arts of the chart, plural arts, which will become ours. And we're going to have a lot of cool things coming out. So I hope you'll go over there and give it a like and follow along. All right. So this has been Uranian Revelations. We'll check out a couple chart examples. You might notice that this tower card is not only on its side, but has been rearranged a little bit, right, to get this kind of cyclical vibe happening. And now look at how, if we think of this as a chart, on the left where we would have an ascendant, you see the lightning bolt. And on the right, where the opposition, right, the descendant would be, we see this fiery crown. And this is this way of working with the chart through 3 seasons. Okay, and what I love about this is like we're starting with the impulse of the fire, and the goal of each of these seasons is the water. I recorded a transmission for EA Zoom meetings last year called "The Wishes, the Wounding, and the Wisdom of the Heavenly Houses." And it's just kind of through these contemplations. All right, so these words on the outside here: the call, resistance, mentor, threshold, initiation, the cave, ordeal, reward, return, resurrection, elixir, and new world. Those are coming in a way through the tradition here of the hero with 1,000 faces. Again, Campbell's monomyth was 17 stages. And it's been seen in many different ways and numbers. The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler kind of brought this into 12 stages. And you'll usually see them mapped in a clockwise, or what we like to say, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, a sunwise fashion. But I'm kind of doing these things to fit it more to the secondary motion, right, through the 1st to the 12th house and anti-clockwise in our chart wheels. And I just can't start with the ordinary world. In fact, this thing looks better with the words backwards and reverse when it comes to Doctor Strange, Uranus, and Uranus is too strange for anything called the regular world, which comes out of this tradition of the hero's journey. And this is why I'm calling it the heretic's journey. This talk today, I was planning on doing it all about this, and it just didn't fit as well for me, but Anna made this overlay for me so I could put charts inside of it. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting Uranus on the 1st, right? And Astro Gold allows me to do this. So it's an equal sign house, you can see, with the degree of Uranus as the 1st. I mean, I love where Uranus was at the time of the discovery in the sacred hoop. I'm partial to this degree because I too am a Gemini moon right around there. But the idea is to look at where the sun is. And the sun you can see here at the top of the chart. It would be right at the closing square of the cycle, right around this time where the return becomes the resurrection. Why return? Because that's the station direct spot. Okay. So William and Caroline Herschel, here's William Herschel's chart. You can see Uranus there in Capricorn. Venus kind of close by, yada, yada, yada. And so here's Uranus on the 1st, and the sun ends up being in this place called the elixir, right? The point of the journey is to resist. And, in Campbell's work, that's called the refusal. I couldn't put that on a chart personally, because I would never say that that's, I mean, a lot of folks are obviously refusing the journey into the weird and the awakening, I like to call the aweirdening. But there's a very important essence of resistance, right? I mean, and I like that so much more than refusal, which is really the same thing. I like to think of Saturn and his rings as this rubber band. Why? Because we have to put the work in. We have to make it tense to shoot that rubber band across the room further than you could ever throw it. Yeah. And Uranus doesn't necessarily work that way, but there's a very important, especially when we think electrically, necessity of the capacitor, which stores the energy potential until we're ready to bring it kinetic, you know? So there's a little bit of that happening in the semi-square here. And I'm not going to describe each of these stages because they're not fitting yet. I've been asking for dreams the last week for Uranus to help me lens this through Uranus language. And I've woken up hearing songs and saying words that are not in English, and it just doesn't work. And this wants a retooling, but I think we could utilize this actually for every outer planet synodic cycle. All right. So the elixir, right, is cultivated not only through first that potential energy of the resistance, the mentor comes in, we decide to cross the threshold. That's the square, the planet is slowing, and that's where we find the retrograde motion that leads us into the initiation of the inner cave. Right, so a lot of astrologers, and I'm agreeing more and more, will speak about the retrograde periods of planets as a time to go within. That's tricky when we're talking Uranus, who's retrograde for like, more than 4 months, or for Pluto, almost half the year. And yet there's still something about that. There's very much something about the retro, about the kind of throwback energy and review energy of these retrograde periods for planets too, but thinking of it as a time of an initiation, with that time when the planet is closest and brightest. I mean, wait till you see Mars in August, when Sun and Mars find their opposition, with Earth right in between, as close to Mars as we've been since 2003. Mars is going to be bright red and, rising at the sunset and setting at the sunrise and dominating the night. That's what's happening when the sun is opposite an outer planet. And in a way, this is meant to be the spark of the ordeal, the fastest retrograde motion, which is there for what? The reward. And I love feeling into the 8th house in that way. Again, it's the reward of the second elemental season. And if we look at it in that regard, and then we bring the reward back to change the world. I mean, we're talking about the heretic's journey in Uranus. That's the point of the thing, right? Change the world. So the resurrection at the closing square, Rudra called the opening square the conflict in matter. That's this threshold. But the closing square, which I call the fruit that carries the seed for the next cycle, he called the conflict in spirit. And here we see resurrection, So another incredible initiation, at least in the hero's journey, when it said to get back from the special world to the ordinary world. Well, Uranus is about bringing the special world to the ordinary world, right? So the 11th here is this elixir. Yeah, and it's really in the sextile zone before the closing semi-sextile, right? So here we see Scorpio and Capricorn, and not such a strong alignment by degree, but in a whole sign or equal sign chart from the Uranus ascending degree, that's the scene. Got it? So this heretic's journey, for me, it's really about bringing back the elixir that was the point of Uranus being discovered to stay. And as I said earlier, like without the so-called Copernican revolution, and we knew about the heliocentric nature of our solar system way before this. But this is a cat who wouldn't publish, right? But to save his life, I just check out where he is. I put Uranus on the ascendant, and here we see the sun in the Uranian 5th, a pretty strong trine, and that's the place of the initiation. So it required the heliocentric model a la Copernicus for us to be initiated to receive Uranus. Here was a teacher, Galileo, right? House arrest for this one. for putting his telescope on Jupiter and seeing that moons orbited Jupiter and not just the Earth, and all these amazing things, that Venus has phases, etc., and that the Earth isn't the center of it all. And he was spreading the word for Uranus, a very strong square here in this chart, and an applying square that would testify, to review a little bit, with Uranus very close to the Uranian south node. Yeah. Tycho Brahe, this guy in a way did publish. He spoke out and he was burned at the stake about the whole thing. Heretic, so they said. And we'll find that for Brahe, with Uranus moon conjunction, those separating wouldn't testify. Some very interesting alignments here, as you can see. The sun is in the Uranian fourth. So we could think about that as bringing Uranus home and grounding it, right? And it's like fourth house themes. This would be another way to play. Hope you see what I'm kind of presenting here. And more than saying like these words are meant to be the thing, I haven't found it fit enough. But it does here, like Brahe crossed the threshold. Look at where his Mars is. Right, so you can't do this for all the planets, but Mars certainly would have met Uranus in Virgo. And so in the Mars-Uranus synodic cycle, Mars is in the place of the ordeal. Aries, and this man was burned at the stake, yeah? Notice the degree of Uranus there. That's very close to where Uranus and Pluto met in recent times in the mid-60s. It's also where Venus and Mars met on October 5th, 2017, just as Jupiter was about to ingress Scorpio, so the beginning of this Me Too movement on that day. All right, Hendrix. All right, so Hendrix in the place of the ordeal, the signs of the Uranian nodes. Uranus retrograde, of course, because the sun is opposite, right? So Earth very close to Uranus. I mean, an incredibly revolutionary being, Jimi Hendrix, who did go through an ordeal and we know did not live too long to touch us with his genius, his heretic genius. Elvis in the place of the return, bringing the strange, Dr. Strange, back to this world. And this Sun Uranus Cazimi yesterday was right at Elvis's birth Uranus, right? So let's celebrate the king. Maybe we should have named Uranus Elvis. Princess Diana in a Leo cycle. Uranus in Leo is an interesting energetic, right? I mean, many of the modern astrologers suggest a debilitation. Well, I will say she's here to be an agent to bring the elixir that will revolutionize royalty. Yeah, and maybe she did that so much. And through the Cancer nature as well. This is me. I'm born right at the end of the thing, and I just put my whole chart in because I'm interested. And again, it's not going to work for all planets. But I'd say play that with your chart. I'd love to find a way to get this overlay to you. I'm not exactly sure how I can do that. Let's just find the right image to end with here. That's the one. All right, friends. Well, I appreciate you spending extra time on the line today. Almost doubled it up. And it's always an absolute honor to speak with EA Zoom meetings. I'm just celebrate what you are doing for astrology herself and allowing many of her journey agents to spread their findings and their words. And I mean, at some point in my life, I hope I find time to review every one of these EA Zoom meetings on YouTube and just learn a ton. So thanks to you for allowing us to present and presenting yourself and bringing together this revolutionary circle. Uranus reminds us that we can change the world. Not only can we, but we should. And that's what I'm talking about. I think in Taurus, let's bring that home, friends. Let's bring it down to earth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Want to do a quick one for me?
Oh, sure.
All right. You want to know January 1957?
I got to get a chart up here. Okay. And for this one, I don't even really need your birth time, Linda.
Oh, no, I don't want to put my chart up. Can you just work it out from January 57?
Yeah, well, I need the date at least, but yes. So hold on a second.
Just to see. And then
January, which day?
57?
What day?
No, I don't want to put my birth data up there. That's okay. Let's not worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
You have to watch out, like
let's just say this. What is your aspect between Sun and Uranus?
A very wide opposition. Uranus is gibbous phase opposition.
The Sun is separating from the opposition?
Uranus is moving towards the opposition with the Sun.
Well, the Sun is moving towards the opposition with Uranus, right? Because the Sun is much faster.
I do it the other way, but anyway.
Yeah. So the sun is applying to that. So your Sun from Uranus would be in the sixth, and that is kind of what I'm showing on here as the time of the cave.
Which one is it? The cave?
Yeah, and so the idea would be basically you've crossed the threshold, you're going within. It's about the inner revolution, right? It's about receiving that revelation like inside, so you can bring that gift back.
That's so true. I
like hearing that. Yeah, does anyone else want to play? I mean, while we're on this.
Who else would like to go? Unmute.
I actually have Uranus in the first conjunct the ascendant. It's 7 degrees, so it's not tight. And the Sun is in the 8th house.
Okay, yeah. So for one perspective, I mean, I was going to show a ton of charts. I had like literally 50 charts that I was up all night the other night, just like these people are very Uranian. But the idea of Uranus in the first, I mean, you're a Uranian being, right? So we certainly want to start with regular astrology, but so what I'm looking at is that Sun Uranus aspect. So to have Uranus in the first and the Sun in the 8th, could you tell me the degrees?
Uranus is at 1635 and the Sun is at 1141.
Okay, so from like a Uranian equal sign perspective, your Sun would be in the 7th of Uranus still. It hasn't crossed to the quincunx, and that's the place of the ordeal. Would you share what sign Uranus is in for you?
Virgo.
Okay. And so then the Sun is in Pisces or Aries, yeah?
Aries, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, that's just a very powerful time in which you were born, and yeah, so I want to like get archetypal and talk about the Aries Sun and all that, but just to get into this, that's this place of the ordeal, and the idea, mostly for me, Uranus and Virgo is the revolution for the sake of what I call Virgo the leaf. I call Taurus the fruit in the flower. It wants to be tasted and smelled and pollinated, which is necessary. Capricorn, the trunk and the roots that drink deep from the elder wisdom. And Virgo, the leaf that reaches for the light and does the inner work to feed the thing. So just as far as you being an agent, a Uranian agent in that regard, there's this development of the strength and the commitment of that Aries light, but also to bring a revolution that reminds us that Earth first, and this is what's so important to me is that we're not going to shut technology down. It might happen to us, and we want to choose change before change chooses us, as I love to say. But, what is the impulse? What is the new way? What is the thing that we can give our energy to that will serve this technological Earth, and how are we even, from like the philosophies of cyborg anthropology, which is a wonderful study, how are we the technological agents of the Gaia spirit? And how can we get in line with that? And I would love to think that you're an agent of that change. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, especially being born with the very tight Uranus-Pluto conjunction, definitely.
Gemini, what would you say with Uranus on the midheaven?
Well,
Leo.
Yeah,
Leo.
That's a really powerful signature. I mean, especially this eclipse last year. This eclipse really highlighting in August 21st, 2017, right? This Regulus, like late degree Leo eclipse. It was bringing attention to that signature. And I was really feeling into a lot of the Pluto Leo generation. And
Yeah.
the Pluto Leo generation's like, you know, that's a very important shift. But Uranus coming in there, it was like bringing that electricity. There's a lovely tale of,
Yes.
what's
I'm
that?
getting goosebumps.
Yeah, there's this lovely tale of the king, or let's say the queen, and the revolutionary are sitting at this like dinner table. Daniel Jamario told me this, and he's talking about the Leo Aquarius axis, you know, and she's like, "Wow, you are like super hot and electric," and he's like, "Yeah," and he's kind of playing hard to get. He's really afraid of like following this love that he's feeling, this attraction to this radiant light, because he's got a revolution, you know. And she's like feeling that, and she's like, "Whatever, buddy, like I got a harem back at the castle." So, and he's like, "Yeah, I got to do my thing." And then they lock eyes and they're like, "But what if?" There's that access. It is such an amazing access of personal empowerment. I know we speak about Aquarius in the humanitarian way, but for all of the fixed signs, I say first, fix yourself to fix the world. And that they do this by the nature of their element. So Aquarius really, I feel, for it to bring the revolution, first must receive the revelation. As the oracle foretold, this is by first knowing thyself. So the revelation in the air of knowing this mind can open us up to the mind of the higher. So through the revelation, we know what to bring, and a revolution that actually will be televised because it's beautiful. So Leo up there at the midheaven, or Uranus at a Leo midheaven, it's an incredible devotion to the revolution of leadership, radiance, bright light. You know, I mean, when we hear these words, royalty and celebrity, I mean, most of us will just want to puke because we have such shit examples in current time, right? But this, like, the true Leo is not the scary skeleton on the silver screen I'm being told to look like, but rather the radiant one. Leo's not about needing the stage and needing the spotlight. The stage needs Leo because Leo is the spotlight. And
Wow.
will bring the shock to help us release ourselves from the false ways of false leaders, so that we can remember that fix yourself to fix the world. If I don't find my inner light, right, and shine, not only like look to the light, but have the faith and the courage to turn my back to the sun, so I can feel that light shining on the back of my heart, and not only through me, but from me. But to do that, I have to face my shadow. And the shadow, of course, for the Aquarius I see is in that place of revolution from the roots of the world tree, which is, you know, home and family. We don't grow away from that. We grow out of that. And it says, you know, that Jung said the branches don't grow to the heavens until the roots have sipped from the waters of hell. But there's something in that Aquarian nature that's meant to bring that shock from on high, to help you kind of revitalize, in this case, where you're coming from, and utilizing maybe a somewhat traumatic situation there to find your own bright light. And then you can be that flame, that roaring flame. This is the Leo gig that other folks can ignite their own torches from.
That's beautiful and absolutely accurate. Thank you. Beautiful. We'll take one more. Monty, go ahead.
Yeah, what do you need to know?
Well, for this experiment, just where Uranus and the sun are.
Oh,
And
all right, yeah.
just by sign and degree.
Sun, 26 Leo, Uranus, 21 degrees Gemini.
Okay, cool. So
Jupiter's at 23 Libra.
So let me just get that again. Uranus at 21 Leo or 26 Leo?
No. Uranus, 21 Gemini.
Oh, okay.
The Sun, 26 Leo.
Gotcha. Okay, so
And I said also,
the sun is just separating from the opening sextile of the cycle. And that's in the place where it's the mentor. It's the beginning of the mentor stage. So Uranus wants to either, first of all, Uranus really wants to speak through you as a Uranian mentor. Somebody, I mean, imagine you're an astrologer, because here we are, who
Yes.
can bring the heavenly symphony down to earth. But I think also it's a time where the shock of, just the shock of awakening, you know, this is the one thing that we see. I think most of us will agree, who sit with folks who are going through these changes. It seems to be one of the criterion almost is this feeling of isolation, or I'm so strange. So to have the teacher that can come in and say, you're not the only one. And hopefully you had that experience in your life, and you are that person for other beings, you know.
Yeah, I've gone through it from both sides. First feeling strange, and then embracing that strangeness and helping other people with what they felt was strange.
I
About
love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and for to serve the Gemini nature, and remember, this is Uranus's north node. So for a Leo sun to be in that place of radiance, but also, you know, it's a wonderful connection in that sextile of the Gemini Leo realms is play and youth. So Uranus Gemini wants to remind us that the Manhattan Project was a stupid game, and that we want to come back to the true games. You know, there's one of my favorite things at all, I mean, to connect really the light and the sun to the Gemini mysteries. There was a book that was too cool for school, so it was buried in a clay jar for 2,000 years, and it's called The Gospel of Thomas.
Oh yeah, great book.
Yeah, and so Thomas, you know, this apostle's name was Didymus Thomas, and Didymus means twins, and Thomas means twins. So in my world, in my cosmology, we call that guy Gemini, yeah? And I paraphrase, but it's something like, Jesus said, the man wise in years will not hesitate to ask a child of 7 days for his place in life, for he who is first shall be last, and they shall be one and the same. And it tickles these feelings of incarnation. But most importantly to me, this says elder does not mean older, right? And it is that spark of life in the child's eye who has not yet been conditioned to forget they are creator. That is the greatest messenger to remind us of who we truly are. And I will say, with that signature, obviously I'd want to see the chart and all that, but with that signature, you are an agent of Uranus to bring the dynamic, bright smile and laughter medicine to help us find our true radiance and know that we are creators once again.
Yeah, thank you. Question: what does Jupiter at 23 Libra in the mentor, not the mentor, the initiation thing, have to do with those other two?
Well, so this is where we want to be careful, because that is one way we can play with the wheel, right? I mean, what I'm doing here in some sense is just turning the wheel, which we've done in so many different ways with you know, derived houses and whatnot. And yet the Sun Uranus synod you were born into was definitely Gemini, but the Jupiter Uranus synod was not. So really, for me to honor what Jupiter's doing in regards to Uranus, or for both of them, I would rewind them to their meeting, put that point at the ascendant, and look at where both of them are in that regard. So an example would be, if we look at Uranus, Pluto now, right? Their last meeting was in Virgo. I put that degree on the ascendant, and then Pluto in Capricorn is on the 9th of Virgo, and the 5th of Virgo. And then Uranus in Aries would be at the Antisha point in the 8th, and kind of work more from that model. So we just have to be careful. If it's a fast-moving planet, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, they're most likely going to be in the house, the kind of derived house from where they last had a synod with Uranus. But for Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, certainly it's going to be a different scene.
Okay, thank you.
All right, friends.
Woo! All right, you must be tired. No, you look really energized.
Yeah, I'm wearing an electric shirt, so it's time to go take pictures of Venus.
Okay, gorgeous. Well, thank you very much. That was so fascinating. Thanks for the great slides. And would you all please thank Gemini Brett, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Oh, and thanks to the artists who participated. All right, y'all. See you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.